here we are. All right. Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with Andy Lipson and Jack
Gerson.
Jack Gerson, our guest.
Again,
yeah. Yes, from a previous episode. Thank you for joining us again, Jack. Really, your knowledge, your involvement really is a contribution to our discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm what's left.
Yes.
Hey, that's copyrighted.
So here today we will be discussing sort of a recap of the discussions on the previous strikes that we had discussed about and interviewed some folks about, Jack being one of them. So that we can sort of give an analysis, sort of meditation on it, and hopefully have a discussion that can potentially jumpstart more conversations about the future strikes. And since we are in the Bay Area here in San Francisco, maybe we can even instigate a little bit on a conversation for a future strike in San Francisco here for this union. So that is what the discussion will be centered around, and I hope that we can have a lively discussion, and we'll be taking turns as we ask questions, prepared questions, but improvised answers. Because we're not scripted, right?
That's correct.
All right. So I guess I will start then. I will start with a question. Last week, these past weeks, beginning this year, these strikes and last year's strikes have really shown us something about mobility, organization. And what we had discussed, Andy and I had discussed in a previous episode, was the Seattle strike. I had a question that I would like for us to both consider about what this Seattle strike and the previous strikes that we've had recently can show us about what's possible to shut down a city and have sympathy strikes. How can we get that level of commitment today from workers and other unions?
So you're talking about the Seattle strike from back
1919,
almost a century ago?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
All right. Jack, you want to start with that, and then I'll try to take a stab at it?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's been a lot that's changed in the past 100 years in terms of the nature of the working class, where people work, and so on. But one area that still has tremendous power is transportation. The Seattle Longshoremen. You could shut down a city with by shutting down the trains and the buses and so on, and the schools and the government. So if you had a general strike of public workers, for example, I think that would bring things to a halt. If you were to, there are two ways. One is to look at inside of a locality. The other is to look at surrounding communities and statewide. Suppose, for example, in, let's say, the Los Angeles teacher strike or the Oakland teacher strike, you had other education unions in neighboring districts striking, and they were supported by the labor movement, which we call sympathy strikes, and could do it strategically. Don't have to, all go out, all at once, all the time. You could have rolling strikes and so on. There are a lot of different tactics, I think, that could be used. There could also be unorganized workers who might join and might actually get organized in the course of struggles like that. So I think that, I think that it can happen. And one of the reasons it doesn't happen, I think, is because there's been an attitude from the leadership on down that says we have to have tied into a legalistic approach and a very cautious approach. And maybe when we talk later about the Oakland strike, I'll illustrate how I think that affected and held things back in the strike. And I think that we can look back to what happened at the end of the strike wave in the 1930s, the CIO, the great strikes in 1934 in Toledo and San Francisco and Minneapolis, the Great Flint strike. But at the end, you had a deal which was union recognition and in exchange for basically a no strike pledge. The collective bargaining from the National Labor Relations Board and the various labor acts, even before Taft-Hartley and Landon-Griffin after the war, essentially are a trade-off in exchange for union recognition and dues checkoff and so on. The unions pledged to not strike for the duration of the contract, and in various places, sympathy strikes are outlawed. In most places, in many states, public employee strikes are illegal. And the union leadership has by and large said we have to follow, these are the laws, we must follow them. And more than that, the way we win is through a collaborative agreement with management, the team concept. That we have to work as a team. We can only gain if the company we work for is profitable. In the private sector, which has led to almost the total destruction of private sector unions, and then a similar philosophy in the public sector. We have to collaborate with our leadership. I think that the red state teacher strikes showed that you don't have to follow that kind of a legal model. They were illegal, and they were able to roll over those. So I think that, one, it's possible to shut things down, and two, we're seeing that the idea that you can't and you have to follow a very cautious legalistic approach has now counterexamples and starting to break down. But I think, at least from what I've seen from the teacher strikes in California, we're a long way from it being broken down. So back up until the past couple of years, the leadership of the California Teachers Union didn't even want the word strike to be used. It was the S word. There were almost no teacher strikes in California. Now, they are in favor of strikes, but they want the strikes to be of limited duration, 5 to 7 days or so on, and then extract something that you can call an historic victory, call it an historic victory, whether or not it's really a good deal. So I think that I think things are certainly further along, and I think that workers' expectations have been been raised, and also people also can't make ends meet. You can't live in Oakland on what Oakland teachers make. So, I mean, those are some of the factors that I think have led both to the strikes and have also, but also I think that the factors that have held them back still need to be overcome, and we're just at the beginning of overcoming them.
So all I'll say is that first off, one of the reasons why we did the stuff from San Francisco was because we wanted to build for us an action where San Francisco was joining Oakland in their strike, and we have a long way to go in that. But one thing that does have to definitely be overcome, which Jack alluded to, which they overcame in West Virginia, is this question of legality. And people in West Virginia were willing to teachers in West Virginia were willing to break the law and do illegal striking in order to see their ends, reach the ends that they did achieve, even if they were still limited. And that's going to have to be gotten over, is the idea that we have to do this legally. It is against the law to do secondary strikes or sympathy strikes because of Taft-Hartley. That law is going to have to be challenged and broken if we're going to actually meet the kind of demands that union leaderships have been waging. The only other thing I'll say is we have to understand that union leaderships are not going to really fight for the things that they say they're going to fight for. And so workers are going to actually have to push them much farther than than they're willing to go. They're going to make a series of demands that they're willing to concede on. Workers are going to have to be prepared to actually fight the whole way, and that means spreading the struggle. They almost did that in Oakland when they were about to shut down the port, and they shut down the strike before they could shut down the port. So those are some things I'll say about it.
I think that there is a mental thought about teachers thinking that they are separate from other workers. I think that this is possibly one of their greatest weaknesses, because in order for them to have a sympathy union strike, or for them to have a larger commitment, they need to see themselves as workers. And I think that teachers normally see themselves as some middle-class professional, and there's a lot of division amongst classes around that. That is the first thing. For them to be able to have a sympathy strike, they need to really relate to other people. The second thing is, there is this identity politics that I think that is divisive, where again, it comes back to this separation, but if people don't agree that they are within each other's working class, if they don't put themselves, us and them mentality with amongst even teachers, such as we were discussing earlier, blacks and whites, or you're not able to understand me because you're white, or you're not able to understand me because you're black, or you're a woman, or you're queer, or whatever. It pits us against each other. And I think that is you stop a conversation. We had a discussion before we had begun this episode about one of you, I forget who, had said, but it's just feeling that there's division sometimes amongst us. I think you said something about someone gave you a cold shoulder or something like that. And I think that there is have been accumulated years of people feeling, especially people of color, not feeling pride over themselves, that we are in this awakening of people of color feeling like they have to have a voice and be honored. And I think that is great, but it is also could be a detriment if we start deviating ourselves from unity when we can all work together. I think that there is something that I see amongst other Latinos, other blacks, and other people of color when I have these discussions with them. So that is possibly two. Three, I think that the other one is that that to shut down a city, I think Jack had said something like this, where teachers would shut down, but they shut down schools, institutions. But if you had actually shut down, if you have a union sympathy strike, you have to have people shut down actual practical daily necessities like lights, water, things that you need on a daily basis to have a huge, enormous impact effect, because that would really make the city not just lose money as we did with the students, $1 million a day, I think it was, for these strikes, but really feel the impact physically, I think, on a city in order for a strike to be effective.
So there were lots of discussions among socialists and other people on the left on whether these agreements reached by LA and Oakland were victories, and whether members should vote no or yes on those agreements. What are your thoughts on those questions? Were these strikes victories? And what do you make of socialists saying, "Oh, vote yes," versus some of us who said vote no? Anything you want to say about that?
Well, I think we can look at them separately and maybe together. So I think that Los Angeles I consider a partial victory, in that well, there are two dimensions. One is the demands themselves, and the other is seeing the strike as part of a movement. So there are some people who are saying, for example, Eric Blanc says this in his article on Oakland, that the demands are kind of secondary. that in West Virginia people were crying because they felt they got much too little, but yet it was seen as a great victory around the country. I think that we have to be honest, and if people really didn't get a good deal, we have to say it wasn't a good deal. What are the aspects that are positive and what aren't? So I think there was in Los Angeles and in Oakland, there was a very vicious onslaught by the corporate privatizers, the educational reformers, who have been out for years to shrink public education, cut it, downsize it. And I think that Los Angeles certainly partly blunted it. They got something in their class size was much worse than Oakland's, and they did get something. They got a reduction of 7. That's a fairly large reduction, but their classes are still way too large. But they did, and they got an adequate, not great, but adequate salary.
Where did you think they got a class size reduction of 7?
It's currently 46 is the maximum. It's down to 39
Really?
Over the life of the contract.
Okay,
So,
I guess. All right.
And also they got that rule 1.5, which said that the district could suspend any class size limit if it felt that it was put them in financial jeopardy, and the district just completely disregarded it. That had been in effect for about 15 years.
Okay.
So that was something positive. They got 3% retroactive to last year in salary, and 3%, an additional 3% retroactive at the beginning of this year, and reopen as next year. That's at least median inflation. Now in Oakland, you didn't get that good. Oakland has much smaller class size max in place than Los Angeles had or has. But Oakland won less. Oakland only won over the life of the contract in about half the schools, and 2 in the other half, who are the most disadvantaged schools. So, but in compensation, Oakland says, well, we won 11%. We only asked for 12. Oakland asked for 12% over 3 years. They asked for 3% retroactive for last year, another 4% retroactive beginning of this year, and then 5%. Instead, they got 11% over 5 years, because the last 2.5% comes in on the last day of year 4. So it's really for year 5. They got no retroactive, and in fact, they only got a bonus for last year, so that doesn't go on the salary schedule. One way to look at it is they would be earning 7% more this year had they gotten their demands. Instead, they are earning the same. They're only earning 3% more, and that's just starting as of January 1st of this year. Next year, they'd be earning 12% more, but instead they're going to only be earning 6% more. That's a big difference. The other questions are, and these are major questions in charter schools and school closures. So in Los Angeles, one of the features that was really hailed was that they got the school board to entertain, and then after the strike ended, pass a resolution calling for a moratorium on charter schools, calling on the state to put a moratorium on charter schools. I was surprised the school board passed that. Monica Garcia, the president of the school board, introduced that motion, and she's a very prominent advocate of charter schools. Now I understand what happened, because I believe that there was an agreement and arrangement all along with the state. 2 or 3 days ago, Tony Thurmond, who was elected in November as state superintendent of schools, with backing from all the unions, named the panel that was going to study the impact of charter schools. Because you see, Gavin Newsom, when he called for the moratorium, said it has to be tied to a study of the impact of charter schools. Well, Thurmond appointed, and I believe I have to know this was at Newsom's prompting, a majority of the people he appointed that study are from the charter school industry. So the question all along was, who's going to be appointed? Who will do the study? Is this going to be a real study, or is it going to be a study that's going to pretend that charter schools are, better, are really okay? So that wasn't really a win, that resolution. If it's as it seems, and this was an arrangement all along. I'm not saying the union was in on the arrangement, but I'm saying that there was an arrangement. In Oakland, no school closures was a major demand. What was accepted instead was a pause of 5 months from March 1st, when the TA was agreed to. But 5 months from March 1st is August 1st. That's plenty of time to close the schools. And it's going to be much harder with students and teachers away for the summer to fight it then, to fight the closures. In fact, the school board had informally agreed for a year pause or moratorium. And the superintendent, Kyla Trammell Johnson, argued with them and convinced them to not do that, to hold out for 5 months, which the OEA team agreed to, unfortunately. So I don't see these as big wins. However, in retrospect, if people see them as wins and are inspired to strike elsewhere, and it turns into a wave and comes back around, and in a couple of years, you have further strikes, which are part of that, well, maybe we'll look at it differently in retrospect. One more thing on this, though. The UTLA contract expires in 2020. The Oakland contract expires in 2021. Supposedly, we're working towards statewide strikes. Here you have 2 strikes that should have occurred at the same time and didn't, and now their contracts are going to expire a year apart. That doesn't seem like progress, to me, towards, getting the kind of coordination and striking together that we should be getting from them.
Okay. Eduardo.
Oh, well, if I understand this question, it is there are lots of questions among socialists on whether these agreements reached by LA or Oakland were victories.
Yeah.
And my thought is that I would think a socialist would not vote yes for these agreements, because a socialist would want to have their demands fulfilled and demand even further. I think this is my thought as to whether a member would vote yes or not to this. Ultimately, I think that a socialist is going to hijack the strike that all teachers, whether they're socialists or not, to try to push for a larger conversation and to bring about a larger movement in whether the state or the nation or even at locale. So I think that this is more of to incite people, to show them that they can do something and that they are powerful and that they are many, and they may not be at the very top of the elite class, but they can do more. And I think that is ultimately the goal of a socialist.
Yeah, I want to echo that, because that's kind of what my question is really about, is not how do trade union people see it, or even good trade union activists, but socialists and revolutionaries. For me, there's no question it was both a victory and in some ways a surprise that LA and Oakland went on strike. Once they went on strike, that is a victory, or that is a step forward for the working class. But no doubt about it, any socialist who argued for a yes vote on the LA contract or a yes vote on the Oakland contract, in the case of the LA contract, they were voting. Then those socialists who were calling for a yes were voting against those 20% who still wanted to go, despite the fact that they got waylaid by their union. And there were people in the community who wanted them to go. Remember what Claire said about there were students who said, like, why did you quit? Why did you give up? We didn't get our demands. And that is where socialists need to be. Socialists need to be with people who want to extend that struggle. Even if we are in the minority on that, we have to be. In the case of the Oakland, it was even more obvious, where it was 42% no. Any socialist who is with the 58% who were yes is like, what side are you on? You want to be on the side of the people who want to bring the struggle to the port, who want to bring the struggle to the Bay Area, who want to bring the struggle to California. So what the victory was for socialists, I think, was the engagement in the class struggle itself. And of course, there were some demands that the lesson was learned again, that when you punch at the ruling class, they will give you something back. But once you stop fighting them, now both LA has been under a brutal attack. There's all these different ways that the union's been under attack. Non-re-elects being done, people who are union activists getting worked on by the district, and we're going to see the same thing in Oakland. That now the attack's going to begin. So I do believe it's important because it does shine a light on what San Francisco needs to do, and it has opened the idea that it has made it possible to say we do actually want to strike, and it's not just a few of us saying that. But I very much agree with the framework you're saying. A socialist wants that strike to always expand, spread to the point where it's insurrection, where it's a revolution, and that's what we're pushing for. And we certainly want to be with the workers who want to continue with that.
Next question.
Jack.
So my question is, was the deal that Oakland settled for really the best deal that could be obtained at the time, as the bargaining team and the OEA and CTA leadership said?
My short answer to that is that if you have demands and they are not met, then it was not the best deal. That is the shortest answer I can say. If you say, I want to have 12% raise and you get 11%, even if it is off by 1%, you set 12%. As a worker, you have more power to be able to make people quake, to make people meet your demand. I know that this is called negotiation, where you have to compromise, but when you are in a position where Oakland teachers are amongst the lowest paying teachers in all of the state of California, when you have teachers struggling to meet rent because the cost of living is high in the Bay Area, when you have teachers struggling to meet all the kids' needs, when you have teachers trying to survive with lack of counselors and lack of nurses, I think they've already negotiated. I think they've already compromised. They don't need to compromise and negotiate anymore. It is up to them to really say, this is what we're demanding, this is what we're going to get. There is no question about it. So that is already, so it's not a victory. I do not see it as a victory when you have demands and they're not being met. That is a short answer.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, I would maybe feel like this is as far as it could go if there was no will to fight among the members. But here's the reality: is the members were sold, just like in Oakland. I mean, just like in LA, the members in Oakland were told, "We've got this great deal. Here it is. We've got class size reduction. We've got your wages. We've got a moratorium on this." They did everything they could to try to excite people and say, "We've got a great deal." And secondly, they did everything they could, the union leadership, to frighten people and say elementary school want to go down. They want to shut down. They can't last anymore. The lines are cracking. You know, we're okay. We're in high school. We're okay with middle school, but we're starting to crack at elementary school. That is exposed as a lie. Well, that's exposed as a misassessment by the outcome of the vote. When 42% of your members who are on strike still want to continue the strike, despite the fear that was put into them, and despite the fact that they're told this is a victory, then there clearly was sentiment to continue and carry on the strike. That went beyond that 42% because the union leadership was essentially demobilizing the membership as soon as they came out and said, we've reached a deal, and then continued to do that by raising all these fears. In fact, we interviewed Donna last week, and she was saying more people were coming to our picket lines. we had plans for how we were going to help our elementary school teachers. We felt we had actually just learned the lessons this week that could now be taken and expanded on. Secondly, the stories that Donna was telling us is that students and community members have felt cheated. They felt like they got used. And so that was actually, like, that weakens our movement. That weakens the idea that we actually are trying to build a broader working class struggle when it looks like we're just raising demands that are used to mobilize you for a moment, but we're never going to plan on delivering on that stuff. So the sentiment was there for fighting harder. I actually think they could have gone on several weeks before we would have seen. I think you need to have the members saying, we need to shut this down. It can't be the union leadership. It needs to be the members saying it. And then we can talk about, okay, this is as far as we can go.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think you have to look at an actually different framework. Because I don't start with what was asked for. You know, these demands were imposed. They are far from adequate. You know, they are much less than what is needed. Even if the raise in compensation were gotten, that would just meet inflation. Oakland would still have less than 1% per year since 2002. Okay? So these were demands that were imposed. Secondly, even on class size, what was originally demanded was a reduction of 4 across the board. And they reduced that. The bargaining team gave it away without a fight and without even a democratic procedure to 4 and 2, and then took half of that. The no school closures, well, that's essential, but that was given away. And we can go down the line. The nurses demanded that they not be given these bonuses, but that they get something like what LA got, a nurse in every school, reduce their load. That wasn't gotten. So we have to look back at the whole process. The process was top down, and the demands were imposed, and then the members were cut off from control of the strike. In fact, there was a strategy committee which was not elected. Half of it, I believe, was CTA. The executive board was even circumvented. They were cut out of the loop. So the whole way that this was processed was wrong. Now, in terms of, do you fight as long as you don't get your demands? Well, first of all, as I said, what are these demands and where do they come from? But I do think that as long as there's a will, you fight. You don't keep fighting. If 90% say we can't do any more, you fight for what you need and you settle for what you can get. But that's not the way that these strikes are carried out. Instead, what's decided is, what can we win with a limited strike? We're now willing to strike, which we weren't before, but we want to limit it to a week or just over. It's not an accident this strike started on Thursday. That's when LA originally wanted to start this, because that gives you a strike of just over a week with 2 weekends intervening, and then end it. That was the plan, I'm sure, all along. Okay, so, I mean, I just want to be clear about that. What's really needed is to restore what was cut from Oakland and then go far beyond it. They eliminated 95% of adult education, which used to have over 30,000 students. Now it's about 2,500, and served, single mothers and immigrants, and so on. Eliminated. They eliminated vocational programs all over. They eliminated most of the libraries in high schools and middle schools and so on. They destroyed public education in Oakland. So, that's the kind of fight that's needed, but that's not going to be won in a single strike, I'm afraid. But that's really what's needed. And so that has to be, those are the demands that have to go out. And we have to get those out to people, though it's really needed, and say, even after this ends, this is what we really need, and this is what we need to go after. And that's my feeling about it. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly agree, vote no. And I also agree that it was more than the 42%. In fact, I think that probably at least 20% of those who voted yes did so because they didn't want to break with union leadership. So I think that, I know there were a number of people saying, well, I really hope there's a strong no vote. I'm voting yes, but I hope there's a strong no vote. So.
This is there is a deficit that that the Oakland Unified School District spokesman John Sasaki had said that teachers will receive the bonuses once the agreement is ratified, and paychecks will reflect the raises as soon as possible, retroactive to the 1st of January. Sasaki did not immediately say how much the new agreement would cost the district, which faces a financial deficit estimated to reach $59 million by the 2020 and to 2021 school year. The question on many people's mind is, where will the city/state realistically get the money to pay for all of this given its deficit?
I'll try to take a stab at that, and then Jackie.
This is on people's mind.
But yeah, I mean, realistically, they're already doing that. They're cutting services to students, the restorative practices. What was one of the other cuts they made to the students?
Restorative justice, the Asian Pacific Islanders program, libraries and librarians.
So there is a cost.
Well, but I'm not done yet. So they're going to, and then they've already talked about laying off 1,000 classified workers, paraprofessionals.
No,
150. Sorry, 1,000. Yeah, 100 to 150 classified workers. So that's their claim. Just like they made a claim of poverty, just like they made a claim of we don't have the money. First of all, they lie about that stuff, and they're definitely going to now try to punish the allies of the teachers, the students, the classified, and try to split workers using this austerity model. The fact is there is money. There's money in California. There's money in Oakland. The businesses can be taxed. Wealthy can be. I mean, this is the 5th largest economy on the planet in California. So that. They lie about it, they hide the money, and then they find other ways of diverting money to things that are there for the wealthy or for corporations. So, yes, I just don't accept that framework that, oh, well, we're poor, so we can't do this, so now we've got to attack your fellow workers. What that is them essentially punishing the teachers or potentially punishing their allies for the strike and saying, we're delivering for the teachers, but we're taking it from you, and that's an attempt to divide workers.
So, my feeling, I will show you. I can show you that the money is there to pay for what was settled for. The real question is, where do you get the money to restore what's been cut and to go forward to get what's really needed? But in terms of first of all, when John Sasaki, who knows about as much as my dog does about what the finances are in Oakland, says that they're going to be $59 million in debt, he's repeating stuff he was given by a finance department, which has been wrong, and then at every turn says, well, but now we have better practices. This has happened over and over again. When the consolidated audit by the state in 2006 said we've never seen a shambles like this, they have no idea what they have. That's been repeated over and over. In June, they said that they were they had a $30.3 million deficit. They fired Vernon Howe, the deputy superintendent of business, brought in Marcus Battle, a new to take his place. He found $60 million. I think I mentioned this in the last video. Mm-hmm. So they're $30 million in the black. No, they're $22 million in the red. Why? They don't know. Battle said, well, we have better systems in place now. We can track things better. That's what we always hear. Okay, let's track them. They spent $14 million last year on books and supplies. So far this year, they've spent $1.4 million on books and supplies. They've budgeted $49 million on books and supplies. In the June budget, they only budgeted $19 million. But they've raised that to $49 million. Why? So they could create a deficit. Why do they want to create a deficit? Because under Bill AB 1840, they get they're under onerous conditions, which can bring on another state-like takeover. They get 3/4 of whatever deficit is actually approved by the county. They will get with no. They will not have to refund. In the first year, 50% of the deficit that they state for the second year and 25% in the third year. So they see it as in their interest to get that money. And if they can put those budgets over. Okay, now, in June, they estimated $78 million, they said would be spent on contracts and services, outsourced contracts. Now, in their latest revision in January, they raised that to $93 million. So they increased books and supplies by $30 million. They increased contract services by $15 million. That's $45 million right away. That's double their deficit. I can keep going. There's something called other outlay, which was $7 million. Now it's $17 million. Okay, now we're up to $55 million.
Yeah.
Books and supplies, they really only spent $1.4 million. So in addition to the fact they increased it by $30 million, that estimate was probably $15 million or $10 million too high. So is the money there? Yeah. Furthermore, they're getting more money in from the state, and they will be getting money under this AB 1840. Mm-hmm. So I don't buy the fact that they're going to have these deficits. I think that's more of their baloney, and they use it to cut. And why do they want to cut? When they close schools, they'll do two things with them. Some of them will be turned over to charter school operators, and many will go to real estate speculators. Under AB 1840, they're encouraged to sell off property because they can use the proceeds to pay off their debt to the state. There's where more money could come from. The state came in 2003, allegedly because there was a $37 million deficit. They left with an $111 million deficit. They tripled it. Oakland should get the difference, $74 million back with interest, which would be over $100 million. There's another source of money. Oakland spends $10 million a year on Oakland Unified School District Police. That's $10 million which should go elsewhere. Right. I mean, I can keep going on this. Yeah. But then in addition, there's Prop 13, which, is the granddaddy of all this. Of course, we're for a split roll tax, which would close the loopholes in corporations and would mean, probably $10 to $15 million more for Oakland. And charter schools, Oakland has the highest percentage of charter school enrollment of any large urban school district, by which I mean 25,000 or more in the state of California, 8th largest in the country. A recent study conducted by an academic from the University of Oregon estimated that drains $57 million a year away from Oakland. That alone is almost making up that putative $59 million that Sasaki quoted. So the money's there. I mean, there's more than enough money there. And one other thing, which is what's going on in society anyway? What's the priorities? Where should money be going? Mm-hmm. If money isn't going to things like education, students, classrooms, allowing school workers to live decently, then it's going to the wrong place. The priorities are upside down. We've got to change the society.
Mm-hmm. I believe that there isn't any money. I believe that there isn't any money. I believe when they say that. Why do I believe that? Because I believe they are saying this in the framework of under the capitalist system that they are operating under. That is the key word that I want to say here. They are designed to have this amount of money budgeted to an education system that is what they're working from, and people who are the spokesperson that spoke, Sasaki, is speaking within that corral, that only space to work from. I think that they should break this corral and get money from the military, get money from the politicians, and get money from the state that is being used and allocated on resources that are unnecessary for us. And that is, and you're saying, Jack is saying that there is money, and I believe Jack, I believe Andy when he says that they're lying. But I believe that they're also working under a system, working under a way to think about how money should be allocated, because they're under this framework of capitalism where only teachers can get this amount of this percentage of this pie in this capitalist system, that they need to only look at those figures, those numbers. But there is money if we're putting in money for the military, if we're putting in money for the wealthy that we can tax. If we want to try to think at a larger picture beyond Oakland, all teachers together and all unions together can pool the money from these other places that are being allocated to. And that is why I think that they are speaking from that. I know that they're just confined to this space to think that there's only this amount and that's how we should concentrate. And if we don't work around this, where we try to find somewhere that someone pays the costs, such as the paraprofessionals. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah.
But where they're working within a confined space, and that's why they say they don't have this money. Not just here in Oakland, but in all districts around this country. I think that is what they're saying.
Okay. So I'm going to do my question. What would you say you learned from the LA and Oakland strikes? And what did you find most surprising in the development of those strikes, or anything? You can, however you want to answer that question. What did you learn, and what did you find surprising in those strikes?
I learned that the ossified CTA bureaucracy was flexible enough to be willing to conduct a strike as long as in Oakland, as long as they could have everything locked down. And I learned that 6 to 7 days is the prescribed length of the strike now. That was the length of the Chicago strike in 2012. The LA strike was 6 days. Oakland was 7 days. After that, all hell might break loose. You let it go, and it could build, and you're going to have the strike on the second week. It might have become class war. It would have been a very disruptive strike. Look, there was tremendous sentiment for going out to the port, and the port would have been shut down. Corporate Oakland doesn't want the port shut down, and neither does the Silicon Valley. It's an economic engine. They don't want it for even a day, and they don't want the fact that people might go back. It's disruptive. CTA worked overtime to try to prevent that from happening the first week of the strike. They raised the objection that it will be we might be liable for damages because they questioned the legality of picketing. Well, picketing is established as legal at the port. The park and the roads are legal. In fact, we finally got an opinion on that, but we knew that. I mean, it's picketing's been happening over and over again. OEA's picketed there more than once. I've been 2 or 3 times at least for just OEA and the longshoremen. They didn't want it to happen. It finally came to Rep Council the night before the strike ended, and Rep Council overwhelmingly voted. I think there was like 100 to 1 or something like that to go out to the port. With an ovation for Jack Heyman, who spoke in favor of it. And I don't think it's an accident that the district, I think it wasn't the reason, but it was one of the factors in why the strike ended. The next day, and a TA was arranged at that time. Okay, so what I learned is that they are flexible enough to be able to have a strike and maintain that control. I don't know the Los Angeles strike well enough to really say, because I really think that UTLA leadership has more control over it. They have their own staff. Oakland staff is all CTA and reports to CTA state. So I also think that might be a reason why the Los Angeles strike actually, was able to win more, because it did, I think, win more. And I don't know, but it seems like the dynamic of calling it off, when they called it off and how they called it off, and falling short of what they could have got, and having a really great strike, which all of a sudden, you have the plug pulled on. So what I also learned is that what we've seen and known of the connections between the union leadership and the Democrats are really very strong. They really work smoothly together. OEA Executive Board, at the instigation of the officers in CTA, voted to ask Tony Thurmond to come in, mediate the strike. And when Keith Brown announced the TA, he thank Tony Thurman and the Democratic State Assemblyman Rob Bonta repeatedly for for having come in and and settled it. This wasn't a good deal, that these friends of teachers brought. So there's a real strong connection. That's kind of. But I also learned that teachers are really willing to fight with community support, and there was much more unity than I've seen in the past. You didn't have the kind of divisions we've had in Oakland before, between the black and the brown community, between black and white. Up until a few years ago, there were large parts of community leadership in West Oakland and East Oakland in the black communities who were pro-charter school and against the union. And those groups have turned around, the NAACP and others. So I think that's important.
I think that I as well learned that it takes about 5 to 7 days for a strike. Ultimately, I'm figuring out as a pattern for eventually people losing momentum. I feel, or somehow something there is happening after 5 days. I suspect this is one thing that I learned from this strike. I found most surprising that teachers, when I was speaking to them, they felt disconnected from their union and realized in this strike that their union is actually a big part of who they are as teachers as well, that they have a union, they have this other organization they belong to, and not just a school where they work at as their institution. And so I found it, I don't know, maybe I don't know why teachers had felt that disconnection from their union. And that's what I found a little surprising. Your union is there. And I think when they speak about it there, but they realize it really is a big part of who they are and what they can use as a tool for themselves. Most dismaying, I think that teachers are trained, sadly, or this is my perception, that teachers are trained, and not just teachers, all educators are trained somehow to leave matters of negotiating to the leadership and not be involved so much, just be picketing, striking out on the streets. But there has to be more of no leadership. We tell you how this is going to go, and not just the leadership of the union take over and then call it a victory and everyone sort of agrees or not agrees. There is something that I think that people are just sort of school-trained teachers, educators about, they leave it up to the people who can, or some idea like that, I find.
Yeah, I feel like for me, when I think about I won't even maybe say it's what I've learned, but I will say that these things were reaffirmed for me, which is that the lifeblood of a union is in its strike. That it's like your union is, and because the true statement that union leaders will make and people will be told is that you, the members are the union. That is an actual true statement. That statement does not become really affirmed for people until they go on the picket line, until they take an active strike and defend their livelihoods with that strike, a collective strike. So that was reaffirmed. But it was even something bigger for me was reaffirmed, is that workers learn fastest, deepest in class struggle. Like massive workers learn that. And I saw that on the picket line in Oakland, and I heard it from the stories that Claire told about LA. And to even hear her stories about how students and community members wanted them to carry on that struggle, that was very significant for me. We're often told, oh, this hurts the community, this hurts this. But the people in the community actually wanted them to carry on the struggle to actually win the demands that they fully wanted around class size and all that kind of stuff. And I think a similar story was true in Oakland, where students, many ways, felt betrayed by the bringing down of the strike. So it just says that the will to fight among in our class is bigger than I thought was there, because class struggle has been so low. I had kind of gotten a sense that maybe the desire within our class is just really not there, and it was more there than I thought. And that was a bit surprising, and that I'm very glad to see that. The other piece is we've talked about where will leadership come from that can make a revolution possible, And I feel like I really saw elements of that, when we talked with Donna and from Skyline, and I'm sure I've heard other stories at other picket lines where people who had never been active in their union suddenly emerged as leaders and as people that everyone trusted, to help make decisions and to help direct and organize things. And it, for me, reaffirmed the possibility of a working class revolution. If these sorts of struggles that we just saw little moments of can be broadened, expanded, and their demands picked up, like Jack is saying, to bigger things. That was, I think a lot of this just reaffirmed my sense that revolution is possible, but that it will only happen through class struggle, and that the strike is the single most important thing that revolutionaries should be fighting for, to organize for, and to try to expand, to ultimately take down the system. Jack.
Okay. On the last day of the strike, the TA was announced at about 2 p.m. When Keith Brown announced it, he said, "We won, we have a TA," and urged people to go home from the picket line at the school board. The picket line was there to block the school board from meeting and approving a budget which would lay off 150 classified workers and eliminate various student programs, which we've already mentioned. People were confused. A number of people did leave, but several hundred teachers and community stayed and shut the board down. And there's a real question of, was there an arrangement, to that part of the deal for the TA was that the picket line, the union would try to disperse the picket line.
I do not think it's ever okay to. I think we were saying something about we were saying something similar some time ago about how if you're making demands as workers, then those demands need to be met. So unless those demands are met, they should not disperse. What do I make of it? It's heartbreaking for me that you have, again, teachers versus paraprofesionales who feel as if there's already that divide of authority and class and power dynamic in the classroom that is just intensifying, because you're destroying that relationship that they have. And by laying them off, there are going to be 150 professionals who are going to be resentful because of this. And that's what I make of this. I think that there's going to be backlash on this for saying yes. Ultimately, will you have the support for another strike in the future? Who knows? If it means they will look back in history and say, well, I will not support it because I remember what happened to people in the past when they supported it. And now I'm not going to put my neck on the line for other people who are then going to backstab me. Yep. So that is what I make of it, that eventually it's not a win. Correct. Because you're going to have this division remembered, and it will ultimately have them affected in the future.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, here's the best possible thing you could say about the OEA leadership, is that they were fooled or tricked into this agreement. I wish I could say I believe that, but I don't. I believe that in the same way, Jack, you really were saying that unfortunately our union leaderships are entirely tied to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has made a century-long lifetime existence of telling people one thing and then delivering another, and on the back end, dividing people, betraying people. And this is what the OEA leadership, I feel, did, because I think they entirely knew that the classifieds were going to get thrown under the bus in order to fund the raises that were coming their way. They entirely knew that the students were about to see some things cut to fund the things to come that way, because they had every intention of bringing that pickets down so the board could vote for those cuts to be made, and then, of course, call that TA a victory. So. And it is entirely short-sighted for exactly the reason Eduardo's talking about, is it cracks and it gives lie to the idea that we're actually in solidarity with each other. And it's a testament to those workers who stayed there and said, no, we're not going to let this happen, and who even went a sick out on Monday and tried to stop it again, and unfortunately were unsuccessful because the strike was brought down and they couldn't keep the momentum going up. So I personally believe this is a betrayal. I do believe that the leadership knew what they were doing. I think they were short-sighted. I think that they felt pressure from politicians who wanted to come in and cut deals, and I think those politicians like Thurman were probably saying things like, if you don't take this deal, then I'm not sure I can go with you any farther, and you're all going to be on your own. And I think the people who cracked under this deal were not the elementary school teachers, were not the middle school teachers. I think the people who cracked were the OEA leadership, and they got afraid, and CTA, Democratic Party politicians basically convinced them, you've got to give, and they did. And I think it was really unfortunate.
Yeah, sure. Sure. I mean, the whole thing makes me sick. I don't even want to think about it, really, because knew it was going to happen when I heard they were bargaining around the clock. Mm. We refused to do that when I was on the bargaining team. That's where, the deal is coming in. And then you hear from the district, this is a one-time offer, sale ends midnight tonight, which is, of course, a lot of bullshit. But and you start hearing, after hearing what a great spirited strike it is and a tribute to the leadership that the teachers are fighting so hard, all of a sudden, people are demoralized. But here you have 1,000 people or more out in the rain, blocking the school board. The day before, they held a march on the day before from one part of Deep East Oakland to another, both of which, were nowhere near BART or, mass transit, meaning people will march for 2 hours from one place to another. They had to figure out how to get back to their cars or some. These are the kind of things that wear people down. And then the picket lines a week. Well, they pulled people from the picket lines to do these marches and told them not to go back in the afternoon. Then they turn around and say, and then they told people to come down to the board early in the morning rather than going to their schools. Yeah. Oh, not too many people are showing up at the schools. One wonder why. Yeah. So, then also you start hearing, well, the district really doesn't have the money when, but they do. And now, once more, they're now using my figures. They're citing the stuff I found on books and supplies because they've been accused of making this deal and being responsible for the layoff. Say, no, not us. We know the money was there. So this is a classic case of CTA and people who in OEA who work closely with them covering their ass after the fact. Yeah. During the fact, they say, no, we can't. But then afterwards, no, don't blame us. See, look, we know this. Okay. The problem is that it's hard to prove it, and when you raise it, then you get, all the bullshit, blowback. But what you can say is what Eduardo says, which is, look, what you did is you walked out on other workers. Yep. Right? And there's no excuse for that. Yep. And that's going to come back at you. Yep. Now, I know that there's more than that involved in it, but there's no point in getting into that. But there is a point, and you have to say what Eduardo said. And I think, we're saying that.
Yeah. So all three of us have some familiarity with UESF, United Educators of San Francisco. You were in that union. You know our union, and I'm in that union. In your opinion, based on what's happened here, what are the keys for union activists pushing for a strike in June 30th, 2020, when our contract comes up?
Well, I think you have a couple of years to, one, try to get transparency and control from below so that you don't have it imposed, and do whatever you can to, one, make sure that the members are informed of everything that's going on, and two, have a mechanism for being in control, like an elected strike committee, for example, I think is important, with representation from the sites, and identifying, the leaders from the sites, and tying that to the demands of the race, demanding what's really needed rather than letting, just superficial or inadequate demands, and trying to really identify early, people who are going to be the key fighters from below, and trying to get people together. to fight for the kind of transparency and the kind of control that's needed. So I expect that some of the people that that emerged, that took part in those sick outs and helped organize them, are the kind of people that you would want to try to get together, to build for the future.
And we're getting together on Saturday.
Great.
Go ahead, Eduardo.
I think that nurses were also thrown under the bus for the Oakland. And again, come back to the counselors, not just the teachers, the counselors, the nurses, and the classified staff. I'm not sure if secretary is the same in the union. I know in San Francisco they're separate, but
That's an SEIU.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, the point is getting even the classified if they're within your union. I know
Yeah.
some unions are separate people, but I'm just saying everyone has to be invested in this. I think that is a key. Secondly, something I saw when we were trying to organize for a strike, when I was working at here in San Francisco for Cesar Chavez Elementary School, is there were teachers who felt as if their colleagues were not, there wasn't that energy in the very beginning for them to organize, to have discussions after school, on top of everything else they do as a teacher. I think it is challenging to do everything you do as a teacher when you have to take care of your classroom, take care of after school things, parents, administration, whatever, and then on still top of that trying to organize. What I think happens in moments like this, the magic really is in networking and getting that energy going together. So networking with other schools, I know when some teachers would visit other schools and see what they were doing and see what they were having discussions, open discussions, they brought that energy to our school. I remember this, and it would ignite us. They would try to hold these conversations with us, and slowly 2, 3, 4 turned into 10 and to 11 and 12 teachers at our school and professionales as well. So I think that if you get the community as well involved and the teachers involved, you start forming these conversations that eventually everyone feels they have an investment in.
Yeah,
that's the key.
Well, I agree with things both of you are saying. I'll just add this part and say some other thing. First off, I do believe in the case of the LA leadership, that union leadership did seem to be prepared to go to a strike, although they were also prepared to shut it down. And they were prepared, like they were pushing for a strike. I think the OEA leadership was pushed to strike, but then once they pushed, they were, okay, we're going to go forward with this, and then we're going to shut it down. The UESF leadership, I believe, is definitely behind the LA. Like, the UESF leadership is not looking for a strike, and they're certainly not looking for a strike. They're not going to do it in June of 2020, and they're certainly not going to do it in August and September of 2020, when the most important thing to be done in August of 2020 from our union's perspective will be the election, getting Trump unelected in the most important election of our lifetime in the universe. It's the most important election in the universe ever in 2020, November. Okay. Well, even if that election wasn't there, I think our leadership is going to be prepared to use the threat of the strike, because other unions have gone on strike, to try to get the best deal. That's what our leadership is going to be prepared to do. So I think we have to do what Oakland teachers did, which is we're going to have to organize like through a network, and initially maybe a small network of high schools, middle schools, elementary, and we are going to have to prepare to take wildcat actions that are going to try to draw in more schools to push pressure on our union to not accept. That's number one. But number two is, I do think, and this gets back to what you said, Jack, I think we can no longer start with the 12% raise. We have to stop doing rinky-dink demands. I think we have to say 100% wage increase for paraprofessionals. They need a 100% wage increase. And I think those are the sorts of demands we have to start laying out. Because they do. Like, 100% wage increase would put their wages equal to mine, which already aren't enough. So what are we saying? So those are the sorts of things I really think we have to start talking about. Like, really making ambitious demands that require a strike and require a spreading of the strike to even talk about getting. And I think one of the things our union is going to do is try to keep the demands very small so that they can say, well, we got this and you don't need to strike. But our union needs to strike. It doesn't just need to strike to demand. It's been 40 years since we've gone on strike I don't think even people know why we have a union. And why would you? The thing has been inactive for 4 decades. So I believe, I'm not going to say it's existential, but I believe it would be a huge missed opportunity if we don't strike again this time, particularly in the context of this wave. We would be part of shutting the wave down if we don't strike. So those are some of my thoughts. Jack, do you have a question?
I don't know. I think I've gone through my questions.
Okay.
Do I have any more?
You say it again.
Any final thoughts you'd have of these last 2 months of strikes and discussions and activity and debates? Any final thoughts about that maybe not take the form of a question, but something you want to say in relationship to it?
Yeah. I actually think that there's going to be a new group of people emerging, out of this, people who have seen what happened, learned lessons from it, started taking leadership in their sites, and were, pretty disgusted at the settlement in Oakland. And there are a number of them. I mean, I have the names of some people who came up to me, and I got a good reaction to the article that I wrote, which has been shared all over the place, much more than I expected. So I think that there are a lot of people who are saying we got to do more and we got to do better than this, and are trying to figure it out. And out of a situation like this, out of strikes, you always get, out of actions, new people, who emerge to take leadership. And we really need that. We need a new layer of leadership, not the same, people who've gone through things over and over again and fought, with each other for decades. We need new people coming up. And I'm hopeful that that's going to happen. I'm curious in Los Angeles what Claire and Honest, think, and whether they see something similar. Secondly, I think that solidarity among the different school workers is critical. That's what we didn't see at the end, finally, in Oakland. But I think in Oakland, there are probably about 10 different or a dozen different school worker unions. And I think that we're not going to overcome that immediately, but we can start making demands of the interests of them and trying to work, more closely together. So hopefully there will be some, with people that are emerging, there will be a crossover between teachers and other school workers, classified workers, and also leaders, from some of the militants from the community. And some of them are stepping forward. There are people who showed up at the picket lines who weren't teachers but are strong supporters and working with them. And I think something, will get put together from that.
I think that this gets me energized. I'm no longer a part of the UESF union. But my final thoughts is that I encourage my friends, my former colleagues, to really get inspired and join the movement that is happening and contribute and to network and to invest themselves, because I hear many teachers say, I just want to teach, I just want to care for my children. Caring for your children and caring for your school is making sure that the system around them as well is functional, because you're working in a very not very doable boat if it's just having a lot of holes and you're patching them. So I hope that those are my final thoughts. I hope that people really try to do this as well. They are encouraged to. Yes.
I'll say, Jack, that what you just said about the new people emerging is really what's been meaningful to me out of this. It has brought life to the discussions I'm having with you or Claire about socialism, about working class, and also Eduardo. It has brought life to that question again about, can the working class change society? That felt like a historical question, not a living question. And now the moments of class struggle has brought life to it. But I will also say directly, myself and another colleague at work, for the last 20 years, we've been trying to build something at our union, and nothing. Like, we keep getting people come forward, and they just kind of get deflated, and then they go. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, we actually have 2 people out of this that are already emerging as one is 27, one's 35. That's younger than us. That's the generation that needs to take up this struggle. And I think they are people who really may want to be in for it for the long haul. We don't know, but it's given me hope about that. And that is the hope, really, is that there are more people like that at all these different schools starting to say, how do we not settle for the same old nonsense? I think they ultimately need to be fighting for a socialist revolution. But at the very least, people who are committed to fighting and to joining with other workers and saying, how do we put up a fight for what we want? And I'm very pessimistic about what's going on in the world, but this is the first thing that's given me a sense of optimism about the possibility of things being right there in front of me when I didn't even know it. And secondly, how rapidly people can change in the course of this. We're not talking people changing in months. We're talking people changing in days, and the possibility of revolution, if it's going to be a socialist revolution, is predicated on the possibility of that rapid change. Because we aren't ready to run society, but can we be ready in a month? Can we be ready in 2 months? What I saw on the Oakland picket line and Skyline says, yes, we can learn this shit in 2 months.
Yep.
Well, that wraps up our very long
Yes.
trio discussion. No?
Well, I enjoyed this. I think this
Yeah.
was
Thank
good.
you, Jack. I really
you.
appreciate you being part of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate.
And Eduardo, great job. I'm pretty impressed with some of your answers, man. You're not even in the union. I was like, okay, what's Eduardo going to do? I have to say, I was impressed.
Don't be impressed.
Okay. I wasn't sure, if this was going to be your show today, but you really did. I think you did a great job.
So let us wrap up by just saying something. I want to try to have your articles, which were very informative, Jack. I read through them and posted online for us because they were really substantial. And they really gave me context and very well outlined and organized. So I invite our listeners.
Thanks, Eduardo.
Thank you very much, 200 subscribers on iTunes. We are incrementing our subscriber list.
Yes.
So I will direct our subscribers to Jack, his article. Please have us that link so we can post that online.
Yeah.
And then, so just to wrap up with this as well, for our listeners, they can always find us on iTunes. They can find us on BitChute, Stitcher, YouTube, and Google Play. And they can find us there. Rate, review, share, and best of all, rate, review, and share. That's it.
And comment.
And comment.
Like comment.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll see everyone next week.
Okay. Take
All
care.
right.
All right.
Good night.
All right.